All right. Well, listen, it is that time again. That's right. Listen, we are here for relationship empowerment. Listen, and because we're here for relationship empowerment, listen, you are not here by accident. Listen, you are not here by happenstance. You are here on purpose and by design. And you know how we do things. Listen, we're not in relationship alone. So we shouldn't be at roughing it alone. That's right. Listen, this is when we begin to invite, we begin to bring people here to this space, those that are most dear and important to us. We bring them. Why? Because when we learn together, we grow together. And so listen, let us go ahead and begin to invite and bring people right here into this space and place. That's right. Listen, you and I are here intentionally today because we are going to learn another piece to the process. We're going to learn another way in which you and I can not only just be informed, but you and I can be transformed. Because how many of you know that your relationships cannot remain the same? And therefore, if your relationships cannot remain the same, neither can you. So listen, if you are here with us on YouTube, listen, if you're here with us on Facebook, I have to remember which one I just said. Listen, if you're on Facebook, I want you to like our page, follow us. Listen, I've started this on my own page, so this is a live recording. And so listen, if you have questions, I want to answer your questions, but you've got to come to two places, YouTube, or you got to come to our Facebook page, Life Empowerment Church. So even though you may be on my page, I won't be able to see any questions unless you come to one of those two places. And here's my last thing before we get started. Listen, if you're on YouTube, make sure that you subscribe to our channel. You can hit that Life Empowerment icon there at the bottom of your screen. Or listen, you can hit the subscribe button, hit the bell so you can get the notifications on when we go live. But listen, I want to make sure that we're liking, we're sharing, and we're following, because it is that time for us to dive into relationship empowerment. This is Pastor and Therapist Marcus Ruffin. That's right. Listen, I want you all to know that I'm a licensed therapist. And listen, I am an ordained pastor. And so listen, I'm bringing to you the best of both worlds. And so listen, we want to go ahead and move forward as we get ready. That's right, to get ready to move into roughing it. So listen, I want you all to go ahead and begin to get your notes out. Listen, I think that what we're going to talk about today, listen, is going to be worth you taking notes. That's right. Listen, it's going to be worth you taking notes. And because it's going to be worth you taking notes, then listen, I want to make sure that this just isn't something that you are just listening to, but I want to make sure this is something where we are learning. And how many know that when you are learning, you're taking notes, you are writing down information, you are writing down things as it pertains to your relationship in particular. And so therefore, listen, let us go ahead and get started. So listen, remember, this is not about any particular type of relationship. We try to cover the gamut regarding all relationships. So as you look behind me on the screen, listen, whether it's personal or professional relationships, let me tell you, communication is what bridges the gap. And that's what we've been talking about here over these different segments here recently. We're on part 5 today. And listen, I'm talking to you about competent communication. That's right. Listen, all of us need to be competent in communication. And listen, and there is an art form to competence in communication. And so we've asked the question and we've been answering the question, what is communication? What is communication? Because if you and I do not have a clear working definition that we are utilizing, then I promise you, we are already off center and we're already having miscommunication. And so listen, we're talking about what is communication, and we define that, and that's why I have it on the screen behind me. Listen, good communication is the art, and that is key. Listen, it is the art, which says that we're not just talking about ability, we're talking about skill. And skill is something that you practice consistently over time until it becomes first nature without you having to think about it. And so therefore, this is why good communication is the art, notice now, of sending and receiving a clear message. Not any old kind of message, not just a message that has words to it. No, that's not the end all be all to communication. Listen, good communication is the art of sending and receiving a clear message. And so therefore, when we understand this working definition, it's also to understand that communication is not just something that happens in the physical realm. It's not something that just happens in the emotional space of who we are, but communication is also spiritual. And that's why I always like to bring a passage of scripture that speaks to, no pun intended, but speaks to the issue at hand. So here when we see on the screen behind me, Proverbs 18:13, and it from the New King James Version, it reads this way: he who answers a matter before he hears it, it is folly and shame to him. Says he who answers a matter before he hears it. And that is so important because we're talking about communication. And we've been on the section that has dealt with the hearing side of communication. And so therefore, listen, this is why, and this has been researched. So this is not just, something that I came up with. This is something that has been researched. And most people today feel misunderstood and unheard. This is not something that has to be the case, but this is something that has been the case. Doesn't have to be the case, but it is something that has been the case. And so I'm really here to be able to help you to be able to, if you're the one that feels unheard, how to help those that are in your circle, those that are most important to you, to help them to understand what feeling heard looks like from your angle. But I'm not just also to help you to feel like you have been heard, but I'm also here to help others who are listening, and maybe you're needing to hear somebody else a little more accurately, a little more correctly. And therefore, listen, feeling heard and being heard is important. That's right. Listen, being heard and feeling heard is important to who we are as individuals in relationship. And here's another research statement that I'm bringing to you. Listen, the person who has the ability to listen is the person who can be most helpful. And I think most of us in any relationship are there in healthy relationships. Let me say that. Healthy relationships, that we are there because we want to be helpful. And usually we're in relationships with people, healthy relationships again, being kind of the understood statement. Healthy relationships is also where we are saying not only do I want to be helpful, but I'm wanting those that are in relationship with me to be helpful also. Now remember, with the subject matter that we're talking about, if you have questions, you can post those on our YouTube page, and you can post those on our Facebook page at LifeEmpowermentCh. And so listen, this is live, and let us just continue to go forward. And so today I want to talk to you about the art of paraphrasing and confirming. Paraphrasing and confirming. Sometimes those are terms that are used interchangeably when we talk about communication. But I really want to talk about also the differences between those two words where we talk about paraphrasing and confirming. And so here, let's dive into this first one, talking about paraphrasing. And so, listen, when we talk about paraphrasing here in communication, now, let me also say this as we are moving forward. You know, I said earlier that when we're talking about communication here, we're talking about both professional and personal relationships. And so when you talk about relationships, you're talking about a meaningful connection. This is what communication not only helps to breed and to birth, but it also helps to maintain. Now, this is not all that it takes in order to have that connection, but communication is one of the foundational pieces. And so therefore, communication is more than just talking. It's more than just talking. And so therefore, as we are moving forward and we're understanding that we're talking about paraphrasing, this is where when you are in a conversation with another person or persons, you are letting the person know. Now, you're the listener at this point. When I talk about paraphrasing, you're the listener. And what I'm saying at this moment is that when you're in a relationship and the other person is speaking, the other person is giving you a message, you as the receiver, you as the person who's listening, this is when at this stage of communication, when you are letting the person know what you have actually heard. Sometimes this is referenced as clarifying. Sometimes this is referenced as summarizing. Now, I've said to you before about the study that happened with a guy by the name of Dowell back in 2003. And he discovered that really there is truth to this statement. We've sometimes said things kind of in conversation with people, but I always like to kind of, in these segments, really refer to the research to confirm that these notions, sometimes these phrases, these statements that we make really has validity to them. And so we have said this before, but it has been confirmed by the research. And what they found is that, yes, sometimes people are listening to understand, and then there are people who are listening to respond. When we talk about paraphrasing, we're listening, we're listening to understand, but we're also listening to respond. Now, not to react, but the ability to respond. Now, this becomes very important because remember the statement that I read earlier, that most people feel misunderstood and unheard. And so without paraphrasing, how does the person who's speaking know that he or she has been heard? This is when, let me just define it. Let me just put the definition here on the screen. You'll see it behind me on the screen. And this is paraphrasing. This is when you're repeating in your own words what you interpreted someone else to be saying. Now, that may be basic for some of you, that may be clarifying for others, but here's what I want you to understand, is that when we talk about relationships, I sometimes like to give these other examples and other areas that I think can relate, because I see that the concepts are universal. You know, when it comes to sports, when you have pro athletes that they are struggling, they are going through maybe a deficit where they're not scoring well, or maybe they're not defending well. One of the things that you will find that they will do is that they don't try to, let's take basketball, which is kind of like my favorite sport. So I can speak about basketball probably more intelligently than any other sport. But let's take basketball. When you take somebody like Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, LeBron James, any of these pro athletes, when they are struggling, when they're going through a time where they're not playing as well, they don't try to go to the Harlem Globetrotters to try to figure out what's some new tricks to the game. You know what they do? They go back to the fundamentals. And here, this is when we are talking here about communication. Sometimes in in these segments, we would go back to the fundamentals, because it is the fundamentals where we are sharpened, where we are enhanced, we are enriched. And so I don't want you to tune out because I begin to sometimes go back to a basic fundamental. But I also want you to know that there are people who are listening who may not have that basic understanding. And so here, when the definition is repeating in your own words, paraphrasing, what you interpret someone else to be saying. Notice now, this is something I do when the person has finished talking. Sometimes, we are so eager to sometimes react, not respond, but react in a conversation, that we will cut the person off, we'll interrupt them, we'll stop them from talking, because we don't really have sometimes the capacity to really listen. And so we're really thinking about, how can I listen to respond, not listen to understand? And so paraphrasing is something I do when the person is finished talking. Now, don't get me wrong. Sometimes I may need to interrupt the person because they're talking maybe at such a fast pace. Maybe they're covering so many points that the whole goal is that we're having a dialogue. You're sharing, I'm understanding. Because even if it is just information and stories that you're wanting me to really hear, and it's not necessarily an exchange of where you're wanting me to actually go and to do something, the goal of me being able to gather the depth of what you're saying is still important. And so therefore, sometimes I may need to interrupt the person, not because I'm trying to be rude, but I'm trying to make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying. I may need to slow you down. And so therefore, in order to paraphrase, sometimes you may have to say to the person, hold up, you're saying a whole lot, and I want to make sure that I'm gathering what you're saying. And so therefore, let me paraphrase what I've heard thus far. Because if we get so far down the road and you say so much, you may feel better as a speaker, especially if there were some things you wanted to get off your chest. There was a story that you're really wanting to get out. And so you feel better and you feel maybe like, man, I'm glad to have kind of released that. But the reality is, if the other person hasn't been able to digest what it was that you were sharing, really, this has been more of a monologue than a dialogue. And so therefore, we haven't really had the opportunity to have communication. And that's why paraphrasing becomes important. But this is why sometimes you may have to interrupt a person just to get them to understand that you're trying to understand them, because you don't want them walking away feeling unheard. And so therefore, paraphrasing, let me give you some examples of what paraphrasing can sound like. Paraphrasing, listen, the goal here is to put the ownership of the paraphrasing on yourself. So if someone is talking, even if I think I am clear on what they're saying, I don't want to assume, and therefore here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to say, if I'm hearing you right, or I may say, if I understand you correctly, and then I'm going to paraphrase. I'm going to put in my own words what he or she has told me. Another goal or key when we're talking about paraphrasing is being able to say to the other person, listen, the goal here is to put the ownership on the other person's words, right? It is to say, if I understand you right, you're saying that, blase, blase, you paraphrase at that point, or you believe that and you paraphrase at that point, or you could even say you feel that and you paraphrase from that point. The whole goal is to put the ownership of the other person's words, right? Because I'm wanting to make sure that what they said, right, is clear to me. I want to make sure that what they're saying is exactly the message that they are wanting me to receive. Now, let me tell you, this is sometimes a trap that we fall into. And let me tell you this trap, is that sometimes when we are paraphrasing or to paraphrase, you know what we do? Sometimes we think that if I paraphrase, that means that I agree with what you're saying. No, 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 no. It doesn't mean that I agree with what you're saying. Remember, the goal is I'm seeking to hear so that I can understand. And so therefore the goal is, and therefore I'm not agreeing with you because I say this is what I heard you say. And therefore it also gives me the opportunity to not judge comments at this point. Remember, the goal is for me to the goal is for me to hear what they're saying, to understand what they're saying. And so I'm going to say something like, after they have stated a statement, I wonder if you really believe that. If I haven't clarified what I heard is accurate, I'm not going to give an evaluation or judgment statement on what they have just said. And so therefore, you be careful. I've got to be careful. It's raising. Listen, because at this point, I'm just seeking to understand the person is saying, make sure that we're clear. Now remember, understand, sure that what you've heard, you're understanding. Sometimes you may have to phrase as a question. You may have to say, so you're saying that, right? Because I think I don't want to assume, I don't want to be with total assurance. Really say. So that the phrases as a question. No, to put the paraphrase person, if the person said, like, get enough room to do what I want, then you're up to say, we probably all don't get what we want, right? If at this point I'm trying to get clarity about what you're saying, I've got to be able to put focus and to paraphrase on what, not to add my 2 cents to it, right? And if the person is to your understanding and what he or she is trying to communicate, then it's important for you to be able to give the person the opportunity to restate what they're saying. Now, you give them 2 times. You may have to give them 3 times. I think at some point, if they are not clear about to you what they're saying, then they're probably not clear about what they're trying to say. And so therefore, it just helps you and I to have this kind of clarity way in advance, because sometimes, listen, clarity, you can arguments, you can avoid misunderstandings. Somebody has said something, sudden you and I begin to hear, you and I begin to react to what they're saying, only to find out that what they're saying is not what being said. And so therefore, this is why it becomes so important for you and I to understand that when it comes to communication, that the first thing that we've got to be able to do after the person do I do that? By what is exactly what they were saying. Sometimes a little summary, some way that I may have to kind of concise what they were saying and hear the points that you were trying to give to me. I know sometimes, listen, sometimes this can seem childish. Sometimes this can almost feel redundant. I've had people say that, like, why are you treating me like a child? Why are you repeating what I'm saying? And use this because they don't understand the communication process. And sometimes they may feel like, well, this is kind of a simple, it's not a complex conversation. But here's what I've learned. Remember, good is the art and receiving a clear message. And one of the things that I have learned over time is that the more that I can do this, the more that this is nature, and therefore basic, not basic, complex, I'm going to make sure that the conversation is one in which I'm following the guidelines so when it becomes a tense issue, it becomes even great, exciting type of exchange. I want to make sure that I am there to make sure the person feels heard and to make sure the person feels that they have been understood. Because at the end of the day, if we have too many of these exchanges and people are walking away unheard, misunderstood, it's going to really put some wear and tear on our relationships. It's going to really begin to erode the kind of intimacy and closeness we have shared or that were built, and therefore it becomes even more challenging to build a great relationship on top of enough of these bad occurrences that sometimes you feel like, well, it's just better just to go somewhere and start over. And I would tell you that we shouldn't throw the baby out with the water, that it's probably more often than not time and the building or sometimes that relationship. So I'm looking here, I'm on YouTube and I'm on Facebook. I don't see any questions thus far. So let us continue to go forward. So we're talking about paraphrasing, right? Well, after you have paraphrasing, here's something that I want to talk to you about, and it's confirming messages. Confirming messages. Now, sometimes when people talk about paraphrasing, say they use the word summarizing, sometimes they use the word clarifying. There may be times that you hear someone say confirming, and it's like I'm trying to confirm what the art of confirming messages. Notice now, I'm going to put this definition here on the screen behind me. Notice this is creating a communication climate. Creating a communication climate is the social tone of a relationship. Now, if you remember way back, and this is part 5 that we're on today. This may have been like in part 1 or part 2. I think it was in part 1 where we talked about, and listen, if you missed and you want to go back and listen to them, they are all on our Facebook page and they're all on our YouTube page. And so you can go back and listen to any one of these. But one of the things that I talked about early on when we were defining communication is that there are these different parts, right? There's the language, there's the words that we use, there is the verbal tone in our words, right? And then we talked about how there's the body language. And when you talk about the tone of your words, listen, and sometimes even the words themselves, it can change the conversation. And so here, when we're talking about paraphrasing, and here we're talking about confirming, we're talking about how people interact within the relationship, within the communication exchange. And listen, every relationship has a certain communication climate. When you talk about your friendships, you know, each one of your friendships, you may share certain what we call inside jokes and inside information, you know, and so there's a climate that is established there. You talk about your coworkers and the kind of relationship that you share, that there is a climate there. We get into romantic relationships or family relationships. There's a climate that comes within those relationships. And so therefore, there is this social tone that defines and distinguishes not only the category of the relationship, but it also defines even the type of interaction that we have. You know, there are certain things that you can say to certain people in certain relationships that you have that you can't say to others. Sometimes it's the time hasn't been developed. Sometimes enough occurrences of interactions and memories and moments just haven't been built. And so therefore we don't share that kind of intimacy, not necessarily because we're refusing to get there, but we just haven't had enough time to build it. And so there are these tones come with these different relationships. And so therefore, even when we're talking about the exchange of words and we're talking about paraphrasing and making sure that I'm understanding your message, right? We also have to be considerate of the climate, right? Because there can be a positive climate, there can be a negative climate, right? And sometimes when we're talking about the exchange in the communication, we have to also be conscious of the climate of the communication. And therefore, listen, when you and I are talking about the confirmation of communication, I'm talking about the tone within the exchange. I'm talking about the communication. And so therefore, listen, with these confirming messages, you can have a positive communication climate, right? And so this is now when we have a positive communication climate, this is usually where people feel valued, right? When there is a positive communication environment, listen, this is when persons are feeling like the tone is right. Because here's the reality. If I get the message right and I still miss the tone, it's still incompetent and ineffective communication. Listen, I'm going to say that again. I think that is worth saying twice. Listen, if I get the message right and miss the tone, it's still incompetent and ineffective communication. And so therefore, this is why when we're talking about confirming messages, we want to make sure that we get the climate right, right? So this is where, listen, people perceive us as liking them, appreciating them, even respecting them. People in those sort of environments, listen, will feel valued. Even if they know, hey, we may share maybe some different approaches to how things should be done. Maybe, my way, you have like sometimes, you get in these professional relationships where sometimes, you have one playing the good cop, bad cop, right? And so their approach to how to, interact and get things done on the job may be different. But the reality is, if you feel respect with somebody that may have a little, what we may say, a harder approach, they may be a little more strict, but I feel respect, feel value, right? The climate, right, is going to be a positive, or it can be a positive climate, even if we share different approaches, right? What is basically being communicated is that you matter. I matter. You're important. I'm important. You exist. I exist. You're just not some number. You're just not somebody on the roll call, but you're actually somebody that's seen and heard. And sometimes when you and I are in these relationships, it is easy for you and I to sometimes, not because we don't value the relationship or we don't value the person, but sometimes it's easy to get into a place that where we take somebody for granted and we can begin to give a tone that does not communicate value. It doesn't communicate that you're important. It doesn't communicate what you bring to the table is of significance. And you know how sometimes happens? That happens sometimes when I don't feel heard. I'm talking to you and it doesn't look like you're listening. Something and you're not paraphrasing, you're not telling me this is what you've heard me say. And so therefore, if the climate, right, the climate is not right, even if we have an exchange, I can still walk away having missed something in the communication dialogue. Now listen, if you got any questions, once again, you could always put those in the comment section. Sometimes when we are not having a confirming a good social tone, a good tone to the environment, a good communication climate. When we don't have that, usually what that looks like is some negative communication climate. And this is where it begins to feel, it begins to look. Sometimes your perception of it is that you don't care. I don't like you. You are not important to me. You don't matter. When those type of temperature gauges are felt and experienced in a communication climate, I'm telling you, you may get the words right, but you'll miss the person. Listen, you may get the message right, but you'll miss the person. And if you only get the message and you miss the person, I would tell you that you've missed pieces in the communication exchange. And if this is a relationship that is of value, if this is a relationship that is of significance, if this is a relationship that has meaning, then you and I have got to work on the communication climate. Sometimes, listen, we're in relationships that we're trying to rebuild. Things have gone amok. It can be at work with a boss or with a supervisor, with a coworker. Listen, it can be with a family member. We have really missed each other. And sometimes we're really having to rebuild the relationship. I'm telling you, part of that rebuilding is creating a positive communication climate. And this is not just about the words. This is also about the feelings. Can the person feel what it is that you are trying to exude and what you're trying to communicate? Because remember, when we talk about communication, the highest part on the pie chart is in the nonverbal communication. It's in the body language. What are you saying through your bodily communication that says this is a safe place? This is a place where there's trust. This is a place where, listen, you know that there's confidence here, right? There's going to be confidentiality practice. Whatever that climate may need, do I have that to bring to the climate? Because that may mean that I may need to do some things to work on me to bring some things to the climate so that when persons are in my space and place, they feel this. Now, if this is a new relationship, there's some novelty, there's some time that it may take for them to see the genuineness and to see the longevity and the fact that this is heartfelt and this is, organic. Yes, that may take time, but what I'm saying is with those that have had enough time in your experience and in your space and place, is that what they say? Are you and I open to real honest feedback so that we might be able to make a change? Or do we just want to continue going on with what we believe is right, even if it's not working? See, I am here to help, improve, enrich, empower your relationships. What I'm saying is not an attack on you. What I'm saying is merely an observation that you may need to look a little more into in order to enhance and enrich you, in order to enhance and enrich the relationships that matter most to you. Now, let me also say this in closing, that there are times when you and I are in these communication climates, and sometimes we may perceive that a gentle insult could have been very well misunderstood. Or somebody could have been playfully affectionate and we could have been misunderstood, or we could have misunderstood them. And so sometimes well-intentioned and meaningful exchanges could have taken place, but our perception could have been off concerning those situations and those exchanges. And so therefore, we sometimes can perceive those things as an attack. And here's what I always say. If you have enough investment in the relationship, you can ask. Obviously, right timing, right space and place it should allow you the ability to be able to have that kind of communication and exchange. If it is not the kind of relationship that has maybe grown to that place, just give it a little time. Time will tell whether or not your perception was accurate or your perception was off. And when there's no rush to, quote, come to a judgment, there's no rush to come to a conclusion, just give it a little time. Just allow time to run its course so that then you will be able to see the validity, because time will reveal it all. So listen, I want you to know that when we say most people today feel misunderstood and unheard, part of that is because of the communication climate. The other part is that when persons have said something to you and I, have we had the kind of paraphrasing that confirms, that clarifies, that summarizes that what I've heard is accurate? Because without having that, how will I ever execute? How will I know that the problem is the problem? How will I know how to go forward? How will I know that I've really understood your story if I have not really paraphrased what it was that you were communicating to me? And so therefore, this is why, listen, the person who has the ability to listen is the person who can be most helpful. I hope that this has been a time in which it has been enriching, it has been helpful, it has been insightful. I hope that this has been the time that it has given you answers to problems. Maybe it's given you knowledge about the relationship process as it relates to communication. But whatever it is that we have discussed today, I pray that it has been worth the time and investment that you have been here for RUFF'N IT, Relationship Empowerment. And so listen, so I want to thank you so much for being here today. But listen, I also want to thank you for the opportunity that you have to support this ministry, this outreach, this opportunity that we have to strengthen our relationships. And so you may say, well, what does that look like? Well, listen, there are a few ways in which you can digitally be able to give and to support here at Life Empowerment Church. And so here, if you would like to support this financially, you can do this through the Cash App, LifeEmpowermentCh. That is our digital giving opportunity and space and place. Listen, you can also do that by giving here at PayPal, LEC at let-god.org. That is our PayPal account. And so we appreciate you being able to, once again, utilize PayPal as a way to be able to support Life Empowerment Church and this ministry broadcast. Listen, if you would like to be able to mail in a check or mail in a money order, listen, you can do that here by sending it to Life Empowerment Church, P.O. Box 7958, Moreno Valley, California, 92552. And so, listen, we thank you for the opportunity that you have given us to be in your homes, to be in your cars, to be wherever you are, to help strengthen and to empower your relationships today. And so once again, listen, this is Pastor and Therapist Marcus Ruffin. It's been a pleasure and my joy to be here with you. I look forward to seeing you again here next Thursday as we continue to talk about communication competence, the art of communication competence. All right, you be blessed and I will see you later.